2, 3, 4. Okay, we're good. All right. So it is 6:30 p.m. So I'm going to call this meeting to order and welcome everybody to the working session of the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners. We will begin with a roll call vote and remind everybody you have to announce where you are attending from. So Mr. Mulcahy, if you would please call the roll.
Commissioner Beeman. Commissioner Hodge.
Present, attending remotely from Ypsilanti Township, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Commissioner Jefferson. Commissioner Labar.
Present, attending remotely from the city of Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Commissioner Maciejewski.
Present, attending remotely from Dexter Township, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Commissioner Morgan.
Present, attending remotely from the city of Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Commissioner Sanders.
Present, attending remotely from Pittsfield Township, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Commissioner Scott.
I'm present, attending remotely from the city of Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County, in the great state of Michigan.
Commissioner Schenk.
Present, attending remotely from Northfield Township, Michigan.
Commissioner Beeman.
Present, attending remotely from the village of Manchester, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you. I want to preface that I've been having some internet problems today. So in case I freeze or go away, let Commissioner Schenk know that. We'll move on to citizen participation. So we're going to open public comment. This is the portion of the meeting where members of the public may address the Board of Commissioners. For people participating in public comment, please announce your name and residence. Keep in mind that you are limited to 5 minutes during public comment at working session. As this is a remote meeting, please use the raise your hand feature, and we will ask individuals to speak in the order that their hand was raised. If participating by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. I see that we do have a couple of people on the attendee side of our meeting, but nobody raising their hand to offer public comment. So with nobody wanting to do that, we're going to move on, skip past commissioner follow-up to public comment, and right on to the county administrator's report.
No report this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Dill. Item 5 is our discussion items. This evening we have 2 items. The first is an update from the Aerotropolis Development Corporation. The second being an update on the summer flooding events with the Water Resource Commissioner. So we're going to begin with Christopher Girdwood, the Executive Director of the Aerotropolis. So Chris, I'm going to hand it off to you. And thanks for being here tonight. And we'll take your presentation and follow up with questions.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. The Detroit Region Aerotropolis is a Next Michigan Development Corporation. So from a legal standpoint, we're an arm of the state of Michigan. So think of us as a state government entity that's funded locally. Aerotropolis within its bylaws has a very targeted industry focus. And so when I go out and I find prospects and leads, or I talk to Fortune 500 companies to attract them to the Aerotropolis region, I focus my work on these 3 industry sectors. The first being transportation, distribution, and logistics. The second, advanced manufacturing. And the third, next generation mobility, which is where I spend the majority of my time. Some recent wins based on the work that Aerotropolis has done with its community partners and the economic development tools it has in its toolbox. Kroger Ocado, in its recent effort to compete with Amazon, opened up a $95 million customer fulfillment center in Romulus. And so in the near future, you'll be able to order your groceries through Kroger's app. The back end of that app is Ocado, which is a UK grocery store that handles all of the digital customer interaction. And an autonomous vehicle will drive your groceries out to your residence, and you'll be able to pick them up from your driveway. And so right now, Kroger is building the facility, and partnering with Cavnew to hopefully find that right way to your house in the near future. Ford Motor Company opened up its Ford Ion Park. So all of the advanced battery R&D will happen here in Aerotropolis. This was an investment that was just announced a few months ago, and then Subaru in partnership with the ACM and Piston Automotive. So I've been spending a lot of my work on low altitude airspace. And I think the reason is because why take a 5-pound part and drive it in a van 45 miles when you can take that 5-pound part and fly it in the sky to its destination? So take that vehicle off the road and use these highways in the sky to create advanced air mobility options. And so from an equity inclusion perspective, the goal is to bring out a new mobility avenue for rural communities. But also, when you look at what highways in the sky will be built, we believe they'll be along rail corridors. And so when you think of advanced air mobility, we think flying a aircraft along a rail line. And what that does is that allows us to mitigate ground risk. And so instead of flying an aircraft above a highway, we fly it along a rail line to reach its final destination. And so I'll get into a little bit of that. But before we did that, we had to build the infrastructure. So we partnered with a company called Airspace Link. And what they did is they used communities' GIS data. And so you're seeing here the city of Taylor upload its GIS data into the Airspace Link technology stack. And what this did is that red circle was a farmer's market. And so the city of Taylor was able to say, we would like all aircraft and drones to fly around the farmer's market. So you're seeing here a local community take control of its low altitude airspace and start to manage it on a day-to-day basis. And so, you know, to the commissioners in the audience, as this industry of low altitude airspace becomes a norm, I think one of the areas where Washtenaw County and the communities you represent, they can get ahead of it by having a company like Airspace Link using your GIS data to manage low altitude airspace along with the FAA. And we've taken that a little farther, and we've done some demonstrations where we've invited the public out to see how we can fly package delivery through certain routes as they navigate through both controlled airspace from a city's perspective and the FAA's perspective. And this demonstration happened on August 19th at the golf course. We delivered Gatorade and some chips to golfers at hole 16 from the restaurant. And it was really simple. It was package delivery into a safe mailbox. And so moving forward, what we think is that if we can utilize the American Center for Mobility, there is a Norfolk Southern rail line that runs here to the north. And if we pull a spur of the Norfolk Southern rail line into the ACM, the goal is to have advanced air mobility technologies, operators, enthusiasts bring their tech to the ACM so we can test autonomous ground vehicles and autonomous air vehicles. And on top of that, autonomous rail cars at the same time. And so from a true multimodal, intermodal perspective, the ACM opens up its airspace to new testing criteria. And so going back to that Subaru win, Subaru invested $50 million into the Aerotropolis region because they were testing their autonomous vehicles at the ACM. They found the talent pool they needed in Southeast Michigan, and they built their own testing center across the street. And we want to use that same model of economic development where if we build out that testing framework for aerial mobility at the ACM, we'll be able to attract the air taxis, the drone operators, and those new inventions of the future to test at the ACM and then to expand outside of the ACM in Ypsi and Ypsi Township in Washtenaw County. And so we're using a model of economic development of companies invest where they test. And we've seen that in the past, and we're just trying to double down on this initiative. So here's the rail line. Norfolk Southern, here's the extension we want to pull in. Just moving forward, Aerotropolis doesn't want to be all things to all people. I think we found a little niche in emerging technology that is low altitude airspace. And I think the ACM offers us a unique capability to build on some of the aviation work that Eastern Michigan is doing, some of the work that Willow Run is currently doing, and then bringing in this new mobility sector where we're going to have to really define, for example, new rail crossing and signaling stations managing air traffic. We can test that at the ACM. Low altitude aircraft moving in the context of rail car and autonomous vehicles. So bringing that true intermodal, multimodal framework testing to fruition. The communication networks, Commissioner Hodge and I were speaking briefly. We submitted a proposal to NASA. And the proposal to NASA was to bring NASA out to the ACM and have them test how aircraft and ground autonomous vehicles can move together with each other. And NASA said, hey, we'd love to do it, but you don't have the communication network to gather the appropriate data in the sky. And so what we're doing now is we're working with the state of Michigan to hopefully find that investment to bring it to the ACM. So once we have that right communication mesh network at the ACM, we'll bring NASA back to do some advanced testing. And then also, I think, loading and unloading technologies, that's where it gets very interesting with DHL, FedEx, UPS, USPS. And so as distribution and logistics, when the vehicle starts to more mimic the cargo it's carrying, and I go back to that previous suggestion, is that I think the future is that no longer will a Ford Transit van drive 45 miles with a 5-pound piece of cargo. I think in the future, what we'll have is we'll have the vehicle and the package kind of being the same weight and the same size. And so take those large vehicles off the road and fly that lightweight package that needs to get to its destination using highways in the sky. And so that brings loading and unloading technologies into the emerging technology space as DHL, FedEx, UPS, and the rest will have to really think how they use their fleets. And so could they minimize the truck fleet and maximize, an aerial mobility fleet if the packages are being delivered to rural locations or locations hard to reach? And so we're doubling down on really this new space, this new mobility revolution that is low altitude airspace. And what better way to do it than build on our strengths at the ACM and at Eastern Michigan and at Willow Run. And so with that, you all have my contact information, but please do ask questions. One thing that we had a lot of fun with, thank you, Commissioner Schenk, for joining. This Cranes article, we invested $42,000 into a Executive Insights periodical. This will be in the September 20th issue of Cranes. It will be distributed at the Mackinac Policy Conference at Cranes Homecoming and in Chicago and New York digitally. This you'll be able to see September 20th. I'm just kind of giving you an overview. It's a lengthy article, but it kind of describes some of the ways Aerotropolis is really embracing emerging technologies. And to be very forthcoming with you, this is kind of a play out of Ann Arbor Spark's book. I love the work that Spark is doing. And we think we've kind of found a little niche here in Aerotropolis to partner with Spark and you all on. And so with that, I'll stop my share and answer any questions that you all have.
Thank you. Looking for questions from the commissioners. Commissioner Schenk.
This isn't this isn't as much about what you're going to do about drones. How far do drones, or should I say commercially available drones fly? Like if you were delivering something from a fulfillment center, how far is the furthest sort of drone flight you would imagine somebody could do?
Yeah, it's a great question. So currently the FAA is only allowing beyond visual line of sight, meaning the pilot of the drone has to have eyes on the drone at all time until beyond visual line of sight is authorized by the FAA. But once it does, I don't know. That's a great question. I think you'll probably have a supply chain hub and spoke model where there'll be a hub and then a spoke off that hub within a 30 to 60 mile radius where those deliveries will happen.
Thanks.
Commissioner Morgan?
Thanks, Chair. I certainly appreciate this presentation, Chris. I think you are working incredibly hard at Aerotropolis, and it has been really good to see that over the last however many years you've been there now. I have no concept of time after the pandemic here, but it feels like quite a while now. And it sounds like you're really tapping into some things that nobody else is working on around that mobility space with drones and delivery and those kind of things. The question I'm always asking is sort of the tie directly to Washtenaw County. And I am particularly asking that now because I think you are you have good things happening that do have a direct tie to the county. And so can you sort of just elaborate more on that, sort of where these things really directly touch Washtenaw County and where you think that they could have a benefit to the residents that we serve going forward?
Yeah. And so when we think about the future of airports, so Willow Run is kind of a heavy cargo airport, but the future of airports will be referred to as vertiports, and that's vertical takeoff and landing. And so when you look at the rail corridors in Washtenaw County, if we could find a few brownfield sites that are in need of remediation, we could then try to work that property to become a vertiport, a vertical takeoff and landing airport. And I think that's valid because drones don't need to be at airports. Drones can be at vertiports in locations adjacent to rail lines. And so if we took an assessment of real estate opportunities in your communities where there are brownfield sites adjacent to rail lines, could we do some redevelopment in those communities and get young people and workforce engaged in geospatial technologies to either work on building these highways in the sky from a geospatial or become actual mechanics for the future of these aircraft. So I look to Washtenaw County to give me the sites that haven't been loved in the last few decades because they have some difficulty, and let's find a way to bring this new emerging technology to those sites. And I think from another perspective, we're a true partner of Ann Arbor Spark. And so I think what Aerotropolis can do is it could find this niche that it's working on and build off of Ann Arbor Spark's larger mobility framework. And so we can kind of insert ourselves into what Spark is doing, and we'll be that low altitude airspace emerging technology component that complements the work they're doing in Washtenaw.
Thank you for that. One more quick question, which is, I did see that Airspace Link, I think, is getting a grant from the state. Were you all involved in that?
Yes. So Airspace Link is, what they did is they took our model at the Lakes of Taylor Golf Club where we flew packages. And what they'll be doing now with the newest grant is they'll be looking to repurpose helipads at hospitals. And so when you think of blood delivery and organ delivery, those are very time sensitive. And so could we use helipads at hospitals to deliver organs and blood to places that need it most? And so we'll be, and Airspace Link is open. And so if there is a hospital or a hospital network in Washtenaw County that you think would be good to demonstrate this technology at, let's get on the phone with Airspace Link and see if we can bring it to that hospital in Washtenaw.
Great, thank you. And I'm always concerned about making sure that we're having a direct benefit to the county residents, but really, really do appreciate your work and was very glad to have heard of Airspace Link because you had shared that with me when I saw that grant come through. So that's a great thing, and I appreciate the hard work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner Hodge.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chris, for the presentation. I want to thank the commissioners too for your support in having the county rejoin Aerotropolis. Chris has been incredibly generous with his time and has worked really hard already to take a look at properties across the county, many of which are blighted or are not in use at all for potential sites for development. So I want to say that I think the investment already has been paying off, and I think, give it a little bit more time, we're going to see some pretty significant change. I'm really excited about the opportunities that Aerotropolis presents with ACM and other business opportunities that could come from that. NASA is very exciting, and we were talking a little bit before the call about what will make us more competitive for a partnership like that. So thank you all for being supportive of us getting back with Aerotropolis, and thank you, Chris, for coming so quickly after us rejoining and giving us such a fantastic presentation and the work that you're already doing. I really appreciate all of that and look forward to more updates.
Thanks. Thank you.
Are there any other hands? Any other questions? Chris, I wanted to ask about the fulfillment centers and what the future of those might be, being that there's a new Amazon one. I don't know how new it is anymore in Romulus. What is the future of fulfillment centers, and how does that play in with Aerotropolis?
Yeah. So the fulfillment model that we're seeing is based on customer preferences, and Amazon has a score for you as an Amazon Prime subscriber. And so what they've done is they've used a lot of algorithmic calculations to find where their best customers are. And they've decided to place fulfillment centers in those locations. And so the mathematical models, I don't really understand, but what I do know is that we've seen malls be transitioned into fulfillment centers, and now we're seeing movie theaters be razed to the ground and transition into fulfillment centers. And so what we have done here in Aerotropolis is we've tried to manage the truck traffic. And so though everybody wants to have their package delivered within 3 to 4 hours, not everyone wants an 18-wheeler driving down a residential neighborhood. And so what I've done is I've worked very closely with Huron Township, who is home now to a 1.3 million square foot Amazon distribution facility. And we've created some very stringent criteria for fulfillment centers to locate in specific neighborhoods, meaning there are left turn only out of a fulfillment center to the freeway. And if they do turn right, there are penalties in the lease agreements for these fulfillment centers. And so I don't focus a lot of my effort on recruiting fulfillment centers because they will occur on their own. I don't need to put any work into it. What I focus my work on is making sure there's a community benefit and we get the traffic patterns right. Because if we don't do that, then the residents in and around fulfillment centers will find themselves in a highly trafficked area, and that causes some disdain. And so to your question, and I may not be answering it, my role really wasn't to recruit fulfillment centers. It was more to manage fulfillment centers to the benefit of the community and the traffic patterns that come with fulfillment centers. And so I think Kroger and Ocado, we had lengthy discussions on to how they will travel, where they will travel, and how they will get to their final destination, which made them more comfortable with the Romulus location because the city council in Romulus and Wayne County became comfortable with the traffic patterns that we outlined for the fulfillment center.
Thank you. Thank you for that information. Just want to check one more time, make sure nobody else had any questions. I don't see any. So with that, Chris, I want to thank you for your time. Very interesting information tonight. Some things that I had not considered. So really appreciate that background. And I look forward to continuing to work with Aerotropolis going into the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. The second discussion item tonight is with our Water Resources Commissioner, Evan Pratt, to talk about this summer's flooding situation. So, Mr. Pratt, I'm going to turn it over to you, maybe for introduction and some comments here, and get the discussion kicked off.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. That's a tough act to follow. Somebody who managed to pack in a lot of complicated information in less than 15 minutes and talking about NASA. Fortunately, I'm here to just talk about water in the streets and people's yards and poop in their basements. So I hope to do that as efficiently as possible. But let me just flip on the share screen. I think I'll just dive in. I know you guys had a long night last night, but if it's okay, I'll just jump in the share screen. I do want to mention, though, that Teresa Gelati is going to help me out a little bit. We're going to do a little survey with you folks right off the bat. So have your phones at the ready for a little quick phone survey thing. And Dave Halteman's on the line, too. I've been going back and forth with him since that emergency about one of the potential action items that we could take coming out of this. But let me just get this old slide deck started. Everybody see a bridge and a picnic table?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. So emergency response, a little debrief, but also a little visioning. And I understand this kind of comes on the heels of Andrew sharing where things are at with the Climate Action Plan consultant. And there's certainly a fit with some of the things we're going to talk about. I just want to kind of do that spoiler right off the bat so we understand there's some continuity. I really appreciate the opportunity to get in front of you while that event is a little fresh in our minds, but also right after Climate Action Plan in front of you. So one big thing I would love to do, particularly from individual conversations from about half of you, is just kind of verbalize everybody's takeaways. I'd say the biggest thing I'd hope to accomplish for us today is that we all end this meeting and we have the same snapshot between all of us of this is what happened to us. So I will walk through some by the numbers of who was affected, where were they at a high level, why were they affected, again at a high level. That's going to be the one little technical part, and the what can be done about that type of thing, just conceptually to give you some sense of it, and then we'll move into that Q&A. But as I mentioned, we'll touch base at the very end of how there can be some implementation planning, I guess, is typically an important part of Climate Action Plan. You know, policy on fossil fuels and that type of stuff is important for climate action. But no matter what we do, even if we were to implement everything the day after the Climate Action Plan's approved, all the physical problems that occurred in June are going to occur again. And my last preamble is what somebody taught me when I first started, is there will always be a bigger storm. We're finding out that those bigger storms have been coming. I thought they'd maybe come after I retired, but that doesn't look like the case. But they're going to get a lot bigger than anybody envisioned. We'll have a quick slide on that. So this is the theme, what happened on June 25th and 26th. This is what happened to somebody. But as I mentioned, I think I'm just going to pause my share here for a minute. If you can get your phones out, or I think this will work on a computer too. You can either zap the QR code, or you can type in that little web address, and you'll need to enter in that code. I'm going to leave this up for a minute or two, but I'm going to let Teresa do the activity in a moment. So just give you about a minute.
I'm going to grab the screen share, Evan, which has the same starter.
Okay, you got it.
Here.
Great. Go ahead.
Just a second.
So we're just going to do 4 or 5 quick questions. The best answer is the first one that pops into your head. We just kind of want to get instant reactions. There's no grading, no scoring. Just get a sense of where people's heads are at, what you remember, what's stuck in your mind.
All right, and so we set this up with just some really basic questions and invite anybody on this call, administration, others, to participate as well. So we're going to give this a go. So this is the first question. What is the most important parts of a county response to an emergency? And please rank these. So your first one, you would be ranking first, and then follow it by second, third, and fourth. Any order that makes sense to you.
And if you can't read anything on the screen, the IT folks told me if you hold down your control key and either scroll up or hit arrow keys, you can actually enlarge whatever's on your screen without us doing that stuff.
All right, it's happening. And then if you're watching the screen, you should see the responses. Don't let it influence you. Just please rank them as you see them. And I'm gonna be looking for somewhere around 12 or more responses, knowing that we wanted to have commissioners and staff responding. And house pets, so that'll be a little bit higher. Just a couple more seconds on this one. Okay, so just I'm going to walk through this, and if anybody wants to, chime in, I do like the immediate results. So you all ranked first that the immediate communication with the public as the number one thing, the most important thing in a county response to emergency, followed by clear process for assessment and action, an easy system or process to report issues, and then following through over successive days or weeks. So thank you for that. Go on to the next one. And I'll share these with you actually after we're done if you want to see them later too. This one, we're just asking you to write a couple thoughts, maybe a sentence. What part of the county's response went well in the most recent flood event that Evan described in June? What part of the county's response went well? I'm seeing a few of these come in. That's great. You can put more than one too if there's something else that's top of mind that you'd like to include.
Somehow I messed up and it didn't take mine, but it moved me on to the next one. So
we'll get it from you and I can add it in. How about that?
Okay.
Okay. So some of you noted immediate response, follow through over successive weeks, the securing that federal disaster declaration, the follow-up received, the assessment over the holiday weekend where staff was working over the holidays to get those assessments done, relocation of displaced people was quick, communications to residents and people on the ground, several on communication to the public there. I'm not sure that it did go well or just as it normally does, fair. And then, quick assessment. There's a few more, sorry, it's scrolling, but these are all great responses. Thank you. Go on to the next one. Obviously, we wanted to know what went well, but what lessons did we learn? What would we like to improve upon? Same thing, write a sentence or a couple of thoughts. You can put more than one as well. Process improvement. I would even ask you to be more specific if someone wants to put in another one. It'd be really great to hear a little bit more about these. Better online reporting system. asked that this is about climate change, so a bigger issue that requires us to make infrastructure changes in the immediate future, right? Even more coordination around getting state and federal aid. Would like to have understood the extent of flooding sooner. Would like a standard way to mobilize volunteers to help. Or maybe a dedicated weather emergency line. Finding a way to communicate with residents about what we can and cannot help with. Drainage and flooding issues are so complicated due to multiple units of government. Absolutely. Early communication was dispersed. A group situation room might have helped hear from all sooner. Shelter and food resources immediately on call in case of emergency. Freeholds on hotel rooms are good. Yes, until football season rolls around and destroys all of our holds. All right. Anybody else still going? Okay, let's go on to the next one. So this is sort of a scoring between 1 and 10. 10's the best, 1's the worst. How well did communications work for you as a leader in government? You can see it's averaging the score, but also kind of showing you how people are responding on the numbers on the scale there.
Teresa, what do you mean by county communications?
I think, Evan, and feel free to jump in here. We were thinking about the communications that came from the county out to the community. Is that what you remember, Evan, that we were talking about with this one?
Yeah, more about how we communicated with each other. I'd say you as a commissioner, what was your sense of how the information was flowing back and forth between you and the county, whomever you talked to, whether you were talking with Greg or Dave or me or a staff person or what have you. There will be a subsequent question on, the last question will be about how do you think it worked for your constituents, kind of. So sort of the internal versus the external. This is good.
Okay. All right, so about a 7.2, definitely room for improvement there. Let's go on to the last question then. How well did county communications work for constituents? That external part that Evan was just describing. Okay. All right, we're at a 6. All right. So definitely even more room for improvement there. So excellent. Thank you all for those responses. And we really wanted to do this to sort of kind of remind ourselves about that experience sort of before kind of talking about some of the next steps. So I'll stop sharing my screen, but I will share these results with you even while we're talking here tonight. Back to you, Evan.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Sorry, I got a dog that's interested in something, so pardon the background noise for a couple of minutes here. We'll get this thing back up and I'll keep us plugging away. Okay, so everybody can see the manhole lid starting to float away on this one?
Yes.
Good. So everybody's pretty literate. I tell you, honestly, one thing I didn't understand until last week was that there actually were more sewer backups in the city of Ann Arbor than we had in the YCUA, the Ypsi Community Utility Authority area. YCUA is, their board is 3 representatives from Ypsi Township and 2 from city of Ypsi. But of course, if you lived in any of these homes, this was very serious and you don't really care how many people were affected or where exactly they were affected. I'm going to touch briefly on how indoor and outdoor flooding are different. I know many of you over the years have called me with a constituent issue, and sometimes I ask a couple of 3 questions to get a better handle to make sure that it's something that my office can do something about or where we would offer advice. The key is the indoor flooding is what caused nearly all of the damage claims, as we allude to above. mostly sewer backups. There was a very small percentage of the outdoor flooding where water actually came in through somebody's window well or an egress type of window. And it's always important to remember in these that we're not getting the full picture when we just look at reports from people, service calls. Not everybody wants to report to the government in general. Not everybody knows how to do it, even if somebody as helpful as Representative Dingell puts out contact information. But also, particularly with basement flooding, what I've learned over the years is not everybody wants the government to know that their basement did flood. They're aware that they have to disclose that when they sell their home, if they've reported it. So this is just a scatter plot. You've seen this before. We provided it to you. The red dots are where there was sewer flooding. The blue dots is where it was more water either in the streets or getting across private property. The yellow ones we've mostly reconciled since then. The yellow was all ones that we just still had to look into at the time the map was performed. And hopefully this was at least useful snapshot for you all the first week after. So what happened? As it says, about what we'd expect for this much rain. Pipes are sized for much smaller storms than what occurred, what we would call a 10-year storm. It appears that what we saw in the areas that were hardest hit was at least a 200-year storm. And one thing to highlight, what we nerds look at when we have a big rain, the rain gauges that we utilize, the public rain gauges that are certified, actually collect water at 15-minute intervals and then tip it out and then recollect. So we can really look at discrete patterns. And this particular storm, there were 2 short bursts that were likely more like a 300-year storm. So that's all very confusing, I'm sure, to everybody. I think the main takeaway is it rained a lot, and it rained a lot more than what the systems are designed to take. And an important thing to remember is that rainfall doesn't fall uniformly. So the official City of Ann Arbor gauges, they don't have an official one in the southeast part of Ann Arbor where they got the basement flooding, but the official Ann Arbor gauges, 3.69 inches was the most they saw. You can see on this heat map, the purple being the heaviest rains, that it was sprinkled around, and Hillsdale had a little cell that was heavy. You can see all the numbers on there. I mean, there's a range across the metro region of 2 inches to 8 inches over that 3-day period. So we've been really lucky lately in Washtenaw County. The last 10 years, all the counties around us have been hit hard. So I'll talk a little bit about the different causes in indoor and outdoor flooding, just a quick primer on it. The risks and consequences are increasing, though. As I say, we've had 60 years of lucky. We've never actually, in the 120 years of recorded rain data of the gauges that we know about, we've never actually seen a 100-year storm. And here we got things that were bigger. But since 2014, every single county that abuts Washtenaw County has gotten at least a 300-year storm. And I assume many of you saw the information on the news report about how Wayne County got hit extremely hard again, and they had gotten hit very hard in 2014. As I mentioned before, the policy documents are important to start doing better planning, but also investment in the problems we have today are a big issue. And another highlight, many of the items were private infrastructure issues. That doesn't mean that the people are any less affected, but that means that really FEMA is the one way that you can help those people out. So it's fortunate that we took quick action on the emergency declaration. And a lot of times the resilient investments require partnerships. There's probably a pretty long list of things that could or should be done, because again, every basement that got flooded will get flooded again. I can guarantee that piece of it. Can we have that be less often and less severe when they have it? So in the outdoor flooding, we count on creeks a lot. Most pipes that carry any major amount of water are just put in old creek beds and buried, and immediately they have less capacity. Pipe designs are generally for a 10-year rain. So it's very normal to see water coming out of pipes when we have a heavy rain. The key is we want to keep it away from people's private property. We don't want it in their houses. Sometimes it's going to be on lawns too. Rainfall intensities, though, have been increasing over that whole time frame, so that anything that was designed 50 or 70 years ago actually doesn't have the capacity for that type of rain. It might only have capacity for a 5-year rain. And some things weren't designed necessarily otherwise. Creeks, typically the water is going to overflow out of them, at least in some areas, with a 2 or 3 year form. That's how nature kind of self-forms with floodplains next to it. As it mentions here, it's really expensive to deal with surface flooding. So our primary goals are to keep the water moving and keep that flooding in open areas. That's pretty common with any agency that's got to deal with events that you just can't handle in your drainage systems. So as far as if we transition from that outdoor flooding to indoor flooding, this is just a schematic of what was allowed for about 15 years from the late 60s to the early 80s. Sanitary sewers are not designed to carry any rain. They're only designed to carry what exits the house system, whether it's the laundry water, the shower water, or what have you. Unfortunately, there was a period of time where those foundation drains were directly connected to sanitary sewers, and that was legal. I know there are some homes in the affected areas that probably have this just from knowing individuals who lived on that same street or in that same neighborhood, and they have disconnected their foundation drains. Many in the city of Ann Arbor have done that in the past. There are also roof drains are often, if you see a roof drain that goes into the ground and you can't see where it comes out, it's probably connected to a sanitary sewer. That's always been against any building code, but over time, any neighborhood is going to have a few of those connected. And from my look, see at the areas that were most severely affected, between 5 and 10% of the homes actually have their roofs connected to that sanitary sewer. So you can picture that can cause a big backup. Storm drains are much larger than sanitary drains. So again, with indoor flooding, you have a host of issues. All sewers do capture some amount of clean water through cracks or what have you, but it's really those at the very bottom, those direct connections, whether it's a foundation drain or a roof drain, or oftentimes sanitary sewer are placed in low-lying areas, just like railroads. You're looking for that path of least resistance, and nature has already told us the most efficient way to move water through any regional area or any neighborhood is to follow the lay of the land. So sewers often get laid in the lowest areas. That's the most cost-effective way to lay them. You're trying to, get all the sewage to those areas. But whenever there's a foot of water or 2 feet of water sitting on top of a sewer manhole, water is going to leak into those sewers. So again, that's my technical part. I don't want to get too overboard on it. I think I've talked to most of you as far as what's most helpful. All of the agencies that respond to these issues and situations in public works have some type of electronic work order management system. So the most effective way for somebody to get in line for a triage call is through online or front desk reporting, particularly because those methods will make sure that we get all the basic info we need: address, name, phone number, what's your issue, and a photo if there's a photo. Because when it's chaotic as it was at the end of June, even though we probably had only 1/10 of the number of issues of Wayne County, as chaotic as it was, it's really important to have some understanding of where do we go look first. We want to know what's severe. So it's always fine to call me to flag, like, I'm a commissioner and I saw this and it is brutal. You really need to put this near the top of the queue. I mean, that's really helpful. If it's just, hey, there's another one that's got water in their yard or what have you, it's often best for them to do the online reporting. So the risk is really that probability that something bad is going to happen. As I basically have described before, that probability is rising, but the severity of consequences, because we're getting more rain in those heavy events, is the real issue. As we see people affected more frequently, we also have concerns about some places. It's not desirable on the right to have water laying in the street and on the sidewalks, but this got cleared away pretty quick after it stopped raining. There was some debris to clear off a few structures out there. Road Commission and our staff, partner up to clean those things off. The key here, though, is this water was not in people's houses. So we'd rather not have water in the streets, but knowing that the systems aren't designed for it, it's just important to understand that this is going to happen from time to time with the bigger events. This graph's a little complicated, but the short version is, in the blue is a statistical analysis of rainfall for the last 130 years. And it's telling us how much rain we're going to get in the 1, 10, and 100-year storm. So the 100-year storm, it's saying 5.24 inches for Metro Detroit area, and so forth for the other ones. But the key is, as you can see, the brown is above that. And by end of century, the forecast is to be 60 to 70% more rain in you name the storm event. We're not going to get more total annual rain, not much more, maybe 10% more is what they forecast. So it also means the drought periods in between are going to be longer. I don't know if that means more fire risk in Michigan or not, or in Washtenaw County, but it's a host of things. It's not just that the storms are getting more intense when they happen, but it's also that the dry periods in between are going to get longer. And the last thing I'll mention about this Brown area, a really smart rain man that I respect greatly, a very smart technical person who many words I can't understand, basically did a mashup of 6 peer-reviewed climatic models of the Metro Detroit region. And this is just kind of showing the average in the middle. But what you see is a very wide range of, they call that confidence limits in the shading. So probabilistically, any of that stuff could happen. It's just a little less likely the further you are from the line. But nobody really knows how bad it's going to be in the future. But this is part of that study. So SEMCOG, this is a simple heat map, right? Green is good, yellow is fair, and red is really bad. This is the flood risk on all the major roads, the state and federal highways, as well as the major trunk lines. And as you can see in Wayne, Oakland, Macomb, there's hardly any green. But even if you look at Washtenaw County in the bottom left, there's a lot of flood risk out there on the roads. So again, the risks are rising, and those consequences, now we're talking about economic impacts and all that type of stuff. So just a little summary of what's coming our way. So as I mentioned before, at the end of the day, there's partnerships, right? If we've got homes that have property damage and lower property values, it's certainly something that's of a great concern to the municipality and their constituents. But those folks are also county constituents. They may not be in your district or mine, but at the end of the day, their taxable value is a part of the county's revenue stream. And it's certainly important to understand that it doesn't matter where the hole in the boat is, we're all going to be affected. Some communities have passed standards saying, well, what are we putting in? Is it got a service life of 30 years or 50 years? And they've decided what they're going to design for in that. A lot of words and numbers on here, but all the major metropolitan areas are recognizing they have to do something about this. In Washtenaw County, our stormwater requirements, my predecessor had started this, but she was not able to get them changed and updated. While she was in office, I was able to get that to the finish line through the efforts that were started. And the bottom line is we require new developments to soak about 90% of the total annual rainfall into the ground. This is good for water quality, but obviously if we've got less rain that's going to want to find its way across the surface to a lower spot, we're going to be in better shape for sure. And we've seen 270 developments since that time. The important part of bringing this up is, to date, I've not seen any of those 400 complaints come in any of these new developments. This is all in older areas, mostly areas that don't have any form of stormwater management other than we've got pipes to try to get this stuff away from our neighborhood. That was just how things were done up until about the 1970s. And the standards for, well, how much water should a neighborhood be storing when it gets built have changed 3 or 4 times since the 1970s. So a lot of what we do is retrofit work and opportunistic work in my office with the old developments. It's hard to do, but with the new developments, we're seeing a lot of resilience built in, and that's a whole presentation in and of itself. But certainly we're doing what we can for anything new that gets built. In sanitary sewers in Ann Arbor, as I mentioned, they've disconnected those footing drains. They've had major storms with 600 and 700 people getting sewage in their basement in the 1990s. And after they did more than 1,800 homes, they were able to really reduce that. Unfortunately, the southeast part of Ann Arbor had some sewer improvements proposed for a couple of years from now, and that was not soon enough for the folks in that neighborhood. They also require new developments to actually remove total flow to sewers some way, shape, or form. So several studies are ongoing in the city to deal with that. And also, since 2008, our office has partnered with Ann Arbor, as I say, to retrofit in neighborhoods that are having major stormwater problems. The southwest part of town had major flooding, cars floating, every bit as bad as what we saw at the end of June in the southwest part of Ann Arbor, and we're going to go to bid with a retrofit project here this fall to provide a stormwater basin in a neighborhood that never had one. And also the rain garden program we do raises awareness and soaks a lot of water into the ground. So I'm getting near the end here. The risks and consequences are high. This is a dam that Commissioner Jefferson came out and toured with me and Representative Peterson. This actually is one item that I noted back in March in sending you a list of, hey, here's an example of some things that really have a high risk or high consequence or both, and are in areas of, remember, I'm a special assessment entity. So whenever I talk about spending money, it's in the form of a special assessment. So either the community as a whole foots that bill or the residents of that community pay. Either way, right? Those are the residents of the community. So as a special assessment entity, this particular site is right in the middle of that ACM property that Christopher just showed you before. It's a little island in a floodplain. We actually do use this dam for water quality controls, but as you can see, it's not in great shape and it needs to be decommissioned. And the only mechanism I have to do that when it needs to be done, which is going to be pretty soon, is either to get a state grant or to do special assessments on the property owners. And we've got 4 square miles of very low income folks upstream of here, no matter what color they are. I would add too that we've done equity analysis of our spending. We just finished our refresh of that. We did it in 2018. And our refreshes showed that we spend about 42% of our stormwater investments over the last 5 years, primarily in a very small area in Ypsilanti Township. 42% of our spending has been in 7% of our jurisdictional area. So we're doing everything we can, but I want to emphasize that's not county money primarily that's being spent. Yes, there's a little bit of BOC general fund money in every drainage project, but not much. Most of this is borne by the folks who live there. So it's important to remember that as we consider what's going on. So again, there'll always be a bigger storm. We know property values get affected. I just want to kind of get to the finish line here with saying, you talked about a climate action plan. There's another thing called the hazard mitigation plan that I'm talking to Dave Halteman about. We're also talking with the city of Ann Arbor. They do have a hazard mitigation plan. The bottom line is there's potential access to FEMA funding for pre-disaster mitigation. So FEMA has been shelling out more and more money every year over the last 20 years. Last year was $87 billion of disaster relief. And FEMA's goal is to have people invest up front so the disaster response isn't as bad. Our office is also working individually with each community to ratchet up the spending and the reinvestment in maintenance activities or other activities that will help. We identify critical assets. We talk to the communities about what's the risks of those critical assets, such as that dam. And then we talk to them about, the type of investment pattern that we would need to ratchet up to try to get ahead of this. So how do we plan comprehensively and coordinate with those LUGs? So we want to connect these ideas with that county climate action plan. It's great that you've got it going forward. It's great that you've got a mechanism in there where the consultant's going to help out with outreach to those communities to find their issues, because you end up needing to have a list of projects at the end of the day. You can't apply for funding unless you know what your projects are and you have some rough idea of the dollar amount. So I've talked about all of these things. It's kind of summarized on these slides. I'm not going to read it all. A lot of money's been invested in improving sewers. I realized 3 years into my career in the early 90s that I would be retired before all the sewer problems were fixed, and that's coming true. The other highlight is never having flooding is totally infeasible, and there's just no way you could ever fund it. Our goal, our focus, and most agencies like mine focus on, we've got to reduce the frequency and severity. But as you saw with the rain graphs, we're really fighting against those rain graphs. What I inherited and what everybody in my profession has is something that is woefully behind the standards and hasn't been reinvested in at an appropriate level. And now we have these new demands on us. So I'm not sure how we solve it all. I just want to make sure you all have a good overview of the picture. And again, these things kind of fit together. They all fit together kind of in a sequential manner. We may or may not be back before you for that hazard mitigation plan. I've got a meeting in 2 or 3 weeks with Dave and the city's emergency manager for kind of a go, no-go decision. Sometimes the level of competition in the funding pools is so great that you're maybe better to still make your list, but self-fund. So we've really got to evaluate that. It's a pretty tough call from what we've seen so far. So that's the overview presentation. I don't think I did as good as Christopher, but I'm going to stop my share and see if there's any questions from any commissioners. I really appreciate your attention to this. I haven't been in front of you for 3 or 4 years, and I live this every day, but I know you guys don't have a lot of time for all these things.
Thank you, Evan. I appreciate the in-depth information and overview. We've got a couple of commissioners lined up already. We've got Commissioner Labar to be followed by Commissioner Sanders.
Sure.
Thanks, Chair. Evan, thanks so much for this presentation, and thanks for the message you left me earlier this week about it. Just want to thank you and your staff again. You guys helped save my house from flooding with an aggressive willow tree that had gone up a pipe. And it was not a small endeavor, so thank you. As you said, we're kind of forced to be generalists here, so just 2 questions. One, if there's one thing for us to take away from this, what should that be, just as commissioners? And 2, on the southeast side of Ann Arbor, as you noted, there's certainly been flooding issues for a long time. With the soil type there, is that an infrastructure question, a soil question, or a bit of both? So what's the big takeaway, and tell me about the soil in my district.
Yeah, so let me start with that second one, the southeast part of Ann Arbor. I'd say it's a combination. I don't know everything about the soil types there, but that's something you normally look at with a study. And I'm guessing that the city's consultant will factor that into things. I think it's more of the geography. I mean, that is very much a low-lying area. The Pittsfield Village condos are immediately adjacent to a floodplain. And it's important to understand that FEMA floodplains are mapped based on old rain data from the 80s. So when we've looked at this in the city of Ann Arbor, when they've done more discrete studies, they've realized that actually it's not a 100-year floodplain line, it's a 72-year floodplain line. So as these rains increase, everybody's at greater and greater risk, but their house is still in the same spot. So what's the biggest thing we can do? I feel like you're on the right path with, I feel like the right path is that climate action plan, but it's the component that I mentioned of having a list of here's all our problem spots. And although we have no idea how we would ever fund addressing these problems, you were at least making a tick list for when there is a major opportunity with infrastructure. And unfortunately, that federal infrastructure package you hear about, whatever trillion it is this week, if it's still $1.5 trillion, number one, none of that money is really aimed at fixing the stormwater issues we've talked about. That could be used probably for the type of sewer issues I've mentioned. But more importantly, that $1.5 trillion is a huge number, but it's actually not, it's a 5-year number. And it's not that much bigger than what the federal government allocated the previous 5 years. It's maybe 30% more. So it sounds like, oh my gosh, this is once in a lifetime. And it's certainly put out there that way. But the fact is, it's not a sea change of, it's not 3 times as much as what's typically been funded and all. But having a list of things so that you can peck away at it, it's eating an elephant.
Thank you. Commissioner Sanders, and up next is Commissioner Schenk.
Commissioner Pratt, I guess my question would be related to the percentage that you provided in terms of, I think you said 42% was Ypsilanti Township area.
And
so
a small part of that area. Yes.
Okay. So my question would be, I would be interested in seeing some sort of comparisons between the maintenance work that's been done in those areas and the maintenance works that has been done throughout the county. Because I'm wondering if that's not doesn't have something to do with possibly the age of the equipment that handles the water in those areas, and or possibly before your rain neglect for those areas. So I don't need you to answer me on the call, but I would be interested in seeing a comparison between, how have other areas of the county been maintained compared to those areas that are indicating they've taken up a lion's share. I just,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, we're speaking purely
I
from
would
a-
like that information.
Yeah, we're speaking purely from a maintenance standpoint, just for the general group. Those are some of the older systems on the east side. And I didn't say it the right way. I will provide this group, as I did with the prior rundown of our best stab at an equity analysis of what we do. It's 42% of our spending has been in census tracts with greater than the county average Black population. And just to be real clear on what we've had, but again, those are the older areas. And I mean, we've all been through some of the training, and we know that people that don't have as much clout or socioeconomic status usually end up living in the crappiest places. So some of that kind of comes into play too, of there's a lot more of these low-lying areas and all. But I will get with you further, and I will share with the group in the next couple of weeks what our little analysis of how we look at. We have a lot of maps and stuff too, but I'll just kind of give you a 2-pager high-level view of that stuff, and I'll talk with the
Because
commissioner.
I would like for the public to also not make an assumption that because there's a certain demographic that lives there, it's
Right.
their fault that we're having more issues, as opposed to possibly being honest and saying perhaps they
Yeah.
weren't given the attention that they were due.
Yeah.
So we can follow this up later, but I just
Yeah, no, that's
needed to
a
make
great point,
correction.
and I always need help with. I've got the information. What's the right way to communicate it?
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Schenk, and then we will go to Commissioner Hodge.
Thank you. My question, well, first, just thank you for a great presentation. I love talking about these kinds of things. I find them endlessly interesting, although I probably should admit at this point that I find almost everything endlessly interesting. So, but infrastructure is pretty important, and it's you know that in my district, I know that Horseshoe Lake has some issues. We've talked about those and talked about how it's going to be really hard to ever really ameliorate that. But I would just say, I don't think that a fair number of residents actually understand that and how important, say, land preservation is, or making sure that the new developments hold their rainwater as opposed to letting it drain off into other places. But are there other places within my district and that have a severe flooding risk? I'm thinking that a lot of the places are a bit higher, maybe, and unless they're right by the river, maybe not so much prone, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I would characterize Horseshoe Lake as the most flood prone and certainly highest consequence area of flooding historically in the whole county. It's unfortunately a floodplain where a lot of houses got built at one point in time, and before people really started thinking about this. Yeah, in general, I would just say it's mostly those road stream crossings are weak points. Maybe on a gravel road, it's not as big a deal, but a lot of times the stream crosses the road and you'll kind of feel yourself going through a low point and coming back up. So what's at risk really is more the transportation system. I'm not aware of much in the way of property damage. There are some nuisance issues in the hamlet, and occasionally folks would like to do something about it, but the cost benefit, usually after the early stages of things, people realize that, maybe it's cheaper to buy insurance than to contribute to a project that's going to protect me, 3 times in 25 years or whatever. I mean, everybody's got to do their own math on that. So I'm not aware of a lot in your district. And typically in the rural areas, we do have farmers who are concerned about crop damage. We've had a couple where we've had to do
Yeah.
some substantial improvements and get a petition because they weren't able to, do what they need to do on their land. And that's, that is an economic impact, but nothing to add otherwise. Good question.
Okay, thanks. And then one more thing, I just want to say thank you for your work on the rain gardens. It's one of those things that has multiple co-benefits, including being incredibly beautiful while it's taking care of some of the flooding risk.
Yeah, thanks. By the way, the rain garden behind me was funded with a FEMA grant that the city obtained to remove a house that repeatedly flooded, but to also make it into a park after the fact. So
thank you.
Who's next?
Thank you. Up next is Commissioner Hodge and then Commissioner Scott.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Pratt, for the fantastic presentation. I'm very familiar with the work because you do a lot of that in my neighborhood and in my district. So I'm always grateful for you and your team for coming out and taking a look at different drainage issues. We've talked about the lack of curbs quite a bit. So thank you for all of that. And thank you, Commissioner Sanders, for your comments. Right there with you, and happy to support whatever that work will look like. I'm happy to partner with you on that. My question is more so around the disaster mitigation plan. I just want to know how we can be most helpful with that, because as you mentioned, this is coming at the same time that we're going to be doing the our climate action plan. If there are ways that we can partner and have them developed together. I know you've got it covered and you're taking lead on that, but if we can be helpful in any way, please let us know what that looks like.
Yeah, my quick answer is keep talking to your local units of government. Ask them where are your problems? How are you worried about climate? Because we really need those local units to be engaged with that climate action plan. That's great that it's in scope for the consultant, but sometimes it's hard to pry stuff out of people. Everybody's busy and all that kind of thing. So talk to your local unit folks as often as you can about, what climate concerns they have there, just so you all have that for when, you're inserted into the process for your input.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Evan, first of all, I love your background.
Thank you.
I loved it from the start, so thank you. And the presentation was enormously interesting to me. I always joke when I talk about drain stuff at the county, I'm always like, this is the county work, but this is really interesting. So my question is, I learned a little bit about flood insurance. We have a family home in hurricane zone. Right. So I learned a little bit about flood insurance and who gets flood insurance and who doesn't. And then after the floods in 2014, when I had a colleague whose washer and dryer were floating at the ceiling of his basement, I was like, and then he was like, and I don't have insurance. And I was like, what? And then I realized I don't have flood insurance either. And neither do most homeowners. So I'm wondering, I have several questions, so bear with me. I'm wondering what we tell our constituents, what to do about how to protect themselves or in recouping property damage, and what kinds of education have we done or could we do to help people understand flood insurance and how to get it and what it covers? Yeah, that's a great question. I learned when I was talking to YCUA, a couple of days after this rainfall, it was really important for their director to let me know that they did send out a communication, hard copy, first class mail to every single, address of record that they had, that they sent a bill to. Everybody they sent a bill to got a letter that said, you really want to think about getting insurance. So they were trying to cover that education piece. I'm not sure what the city of Ann Arbor does. As I mentioned, it's really about basement backups is where you need the insurance, where you're getting that property damage. I get that people don't like water in their yards, back or front, even if there's a drainage easement in their backyard that says there's always supposed to be water flowing there when it rains, people don't like it. So I guess the only thing I can say is when you do get that damage in your house, even if you've got insurance, I mean, we've probably all talked to somebody who's like, well, yeah, they helped, but I was disrupted for a couple, 4 months, and I was never really made whole because the insurance only covered this, and you got to jump through 92 flaming hoops. And who has time for that? I mean, none of us have time for that. And we've got it a lot easier than a lot of these people that were affected. I mean, we heard people coming and telling you about their dream home and
and then what happened to them after that. I get calls probably at least a half a dozen a year filter up to me. And I imagine other people on my staff get calls about, hey, should I get this sewer insurance, this basement insurance? If anybody ever says sewer, I said, I would get it if you can afford it, regardless of where you live. But usually I just have to say, I don't really know where you live, but if everybody's house is higher than yours, absolutely. But then it's usually, we all are trying to shop and compare, and sometimes it's not obvious that a house is more prone to having a problem than another house. I mean, sometimes it's a private sewer lead. There's so many things that can be an issue. I don't know how to do education, but that would be a perfect thing to have as a task in a hazard mitigation plan. And it's probably fundable if you have to spend enough money to do that outreach. You know, well, what do we mean by saying we want to educate people? Is that $30,000 or $130,000? Because there is a lot of hoop jumping to actually get money. At some point, unless you're getting $500,000, it's probably not worth chasing it just for the time and energy you put into it for what you get out of it.
Yeah, that I understand all that. I mean, I'm wondering, this is where like so many of our county departments, you know, and things that we do cross, you know, there's no clear boundaries in things that happen. So like, that's why Teresa is on this call with you, but also sewer backing up into people's basements, and any of this climate mitigation and climate planning is also a clear public health issue. I wonder if it's something that public health, who has people who've done really great advertising and have people who have expertise about education, could get involved with somehow. I mean, I don't want to add anything to their plate right now, God knows, but I just wonder about creating some education programs in general. I do think municipalities, individual municipalities should be responsible for that, but even doing some kind of focused Zoom webinar or something for people to understand what flood insurance or sewer insurance means. My second question, and this is kind of more of a general question. So, I mean, a few years ago, I had them come and, you know, put the camera down my drain and snake out my drain till it was all doing really well. And they're like, you should do this every year. It's like homeowners like thing to do every year. I haven't done it every year. I should, but I'm thinking about our weatherization program that we approved last night in the ARPA funding. And this isn't traditional weatherization, but I'm wondering if that type of service of having those drains cleared out in some of these areas that have the issue with sewage backing up could be included in the weatherization program with our ARPA funds for high risk and high areas, for those high risk flood areas. It's something for us to think about and look at the feasibility of it, because it's definitely related to climate change, to these like 300-year storms. So just when you were talking about that.
Oh, sorry. Certain sewer activities are ARPA fundable. Probably not cleaning out the leads, but permanently disconnecting those foundation drains from the sewer, because that's the point of entry. The water can't back up into the house once you do that. It's just usually you have to get kind of a whole neighborhood to do it. I shouldn't say the water can't back up into the house. It can't come in through that pathway, but you know, so the toilet's 3 feet higher than the floor drain. If you got one in the basement, then that just means 3 more feet of water is what it would take to have the issue. And then, I mean, people did talk about in this, you know, my toilet was a geyser, you know, you get all kinds of things from folks. So ARPA would fund a program to do that. I have not quite, the city of Ypsilanti, one of their DPW staff had mild interest in, we might want to do that. So I am working, although sewers aren't my thing because I have a background, I'm working to try to figure out how to initiate a conversation with both the township and the city on, would you want to do this? Because from YCUA's standpoint, you get into a fairness. I don't want to necessarily use the word equity, but at least fairness, if not equity, when you say, we're going to do this because it's good for the system, but what you're really doing is addressing a very small number of homes that have a system issues. That's something everybody should have to pay for, especially when they're not on that sewer and aren't at risk at all. It's a really thorny issue. So I think from YCUA's perspective, I don't want to be too far out and speak for them, but I think their thinking is an external funding source would really help make that go away. And is that a partnership that could be township ARPA money, state ARPA money, and maybe the county has a set aside? That's up for you all to decide. You know, is there a certain amount where you would chip in and help a community that wants to help itself? Does that make a community want to help themselves a little more if they know, well, if I put some money in, I can get some more? Certainly at the state level, we're talking about at least $650 million, I think, is aimed at sewer type infrastructure, at least in the supplemental package. You know, the state's trying to figure out how to give out the ARPA money, and the Senate has their version at $2.5 billion. Michigan Association of Counties, my drain commissioners group, MML, MTA are working on something that's more like $4 billion that gets beyond just infrastructure and into many of the things you all have talked about. I sent Andrew some stuff on that today. And, you know, the communities get ARPA money too. To me, anything that you do with ARPA money, it's really great to think about, can I leverage it? Can the community contribute something? There's some things of, no, that's really only, that's only we can do because it's our employees providing this public health service. There's really not a way for that community to chip in because they didn't have a direct cost. But something like a sewer is a direct cost that's certainly worth considering and unfolding. And it's probably going to be before the end of the year before I have an understanding of where Ypsi City and Ypsi Township might be at and what they might want to talk about. I just don't know. And I'll try to work through the administration as that goes.
Evan, send them the illustration you sent to us about how this flooding impacts us all. I mean, certainly the flooding that happened in Ypsi is not demonstrably impacting me in District 9 in Washtenaw County, but it does impact all of us because of what it does. I mean, purely on an economic sense. And I hate to make things go down to that level, but that's often where people understand things. So thank you very much for answering my questions really fully. And thanks for giving us more to think about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to really thank you, Evan, and really highlight the resiliency piece. And so I will spend a long couple of days, so I'll retain some of my questions here, and follow up with you later. But I think the big piece that we need to focus on is that resiliency piece. And I was glad to see Dave Haltman on. Where'd he go? He was on here earlier.
He did have a conflict tonight. He said that, you know,
he was here earlier. I'll follow up with him. My hope would be that we also discuss this and that the Homeland Security Task Force that we have, that I've been our county rep to for a number of years here, because this is one of our risks to our residents. As Katie was talking about, it's not just, your basement flooding. It is a legitimate risk to our residents with power outages, with mold, with poop in your basement. I don't know how else to say it, but it's not healthy. And it's a real risk to the health and safety of our residents. So hopefully that's something we can discuss there more as well. And I'll follow up with Dave on that. But I am so glad that we have you, Evan, because I think you're brilliant. And I'm not just saying that to try and make you feel good. I really do think that. We are lucky to have you as we try and deal with these issues. My hope would be that you help us figure out how we can get ahead of the issues that we're seeing in Wayne and Oakland County, and get a handle on the issues that we're having here in Washtenaw County so that we can essentially do better in the future at these crazy storms that we're having. Thanks, Evan.
I really appreciate everyone took the time to attend tonight and has been extremely attentive. I know sometimes when I'm responding to a question, I'm not as efficient as I would be if I had time to write it down and think about what's the fastest way to say this. I do want to leave you with one last thought. I told Andrew this story. I was on a keynote panel at our National Public Works convention, and it was the morning speech for a lot of people. And to the left of me is the guy from Houston, and his first slide is, in the last 40 years, we've been declared a federal disaster area 28 times. 22 of those are for flooding. We don't have lessons learned. We have lessons applied and lessons ignored. So that's an important thing that I have taken away from that of, we don't want to be sitting here having this exact same conversation and saying, we really need to make that list, 3 years from now or whatever. I'm very scared. The reason I had my guys finally put together our internal emergency response plan 2 or 3 years ago was just so we'd at least have a list of calls and a protocol for how are we going to communicate with each other, because I had seen every single one of these counties get absolutely hammered, and we have been so lucky that we have not gotten the 10X event that Wayne County's seen twice. We're so lucky. Thank you.
Okay, one last go around, make sure nobody has any questions. Commissioner, I think I saw your cat raise a paw at one point, but maybe not. Probably not. With that.
He likes, sorry.
That's okay, go ahead.
Twist likes water quite a bit, not floods, but he does like to sit under the faucet and wait for the water to drip out. And he will also shower. So maybe that's why he came to sit on me here. I don't know. Thank you for your indulgence.
You're welcome. Commissioner Sanders, do you have another question?
Just a quick one. Commissioner Pratt, have you been contacted by any supervisors of municipalities about partnering with you in terms of fixing issues that they may have and utilizing some of their American Rescue funding to do that in partnership with your office?
Yeah, I'd say probably a half a dozen supervisors would be interested in some type of match. I mean, I don't really have anything to match with. You know, maybe there's a day where we have something set up that we could do that, kind of like Parks does with connecting communities. But Ann Arbor Township was just telling me yesterday, Diane was just telling me about an issue I'd never even heard of. I thought she would want to partner on. There's a problem at Clark Road down by Safe House. If you ever talk to anybody from Safe House, ask them like, hey, does it ever flood out in the road next to you? Oh yeah, very frequently. So certainly Ypsi Township, Freedom, Augusta, certainly Augusta is the wettest place in the whole county. Not as much of the type of flooding that you have at Horseshoe Lake, but Augusta Township is very wet. That's old lake bed from when Lake Erie used to be much bigger before the glaciers finished melting. And certainly Pittsfield, York Township, Chuck down there, they've got a number of things that they're concerned about. And it is like in the memo that we provided, it's mostly those townships that have a lot of these culverts. I mean, for Augusta, for example, Hitchingham Road has been closed for 1.5 years, and they just got told that it's going to be another 9 months. And that was extremely disappointing for them, but that's how the funding that the road commission can access would work. So I would guess that, Augusta would be happy to chip in immediately. I think they've got 6 or 7 of these, and, they're all headed for closures. I think only 5 or 6 roads are, closed for long-term right now. But if you live near there, you're not too happy about it. Saline Township too. I mean, that not a lot, but Saline Township was the origin of the road commission looking into things when a combine fell through a bridge into a creek. Nobody got hurt, but it got their attention. Good question.
Thank you. Commissioner Morgan, do you have another question or are you all set? You're good. Okay. Just saw the hand.
All
up
right,
there.
Yep.
Okay. With that, I don't see anybody else with any questions. I want to thank the Water Resource Commissioner for joining us tonight and sharing all of that great information. And hopefully you got some feedback from us to maybe help guide what some of the questions and concerns that we have are. So thank you.
Yeah, we did the best we could with that survey. So I hope you find that useful. It was all intended to be safe space questions so that we can, find out whatever we can find out. If we can do just a smidge better the next go around, let's do a smidge better. And I think Teresa said she would be sharing, what the responses were, so everybody can, eyeball that. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on to items for current or future discussion. Are there any? Don't see any. I do not believe we have any pending items tonight, which would move us to adjournment.
I will move that.
Support.
Moved and support. All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Everybody enjoy the rest of your evening.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night. Hey, Jason Maciejewski, are you still there? Or did he go?
Yes.
Oh, you
Yes.
ran a great meeting. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.